Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever it is, wherever you are, whoever you are. Welcome once again to Full Fat Spoiler Chat, the weekly show in which we take a deep dive looking at some recent piece of nerd entertainment. And tonight it is Mulan. The live action Mulan, of course, which is the recent one. The actual Disney animated version was way back when, and that wouldn't
Way
be
better.
spoiling anything now, would it? I'm Rodney Brown. I'm the editor in chief of Nerd Caliber, first person shooter as a cosplay photographer on the Facebooks, and Burley underscore adopter on Twitter. Joining me tonight is the fantabulous and equally bald, no cap, awesome. I get to have a bald brother. Byron, if you would.
Hey guys, Byron McNeil, aka Byron D0, contributing writer for Nerd Caliber, and as well as content creator on a number of levels for the site. Um, and I also do my own thing with art on the side, interwebs. Um, you can find a lot of my work on Instagram under the name BD0Art. Look it up. It's BD0Art. Look for the logo that looks like the Laughing Man from Ghost in the Shell.
Ooh, cool, cool. All right. Um, so, folks, as if you're familiar with the show, you know that we are going to be talking about this movie uh, with full spoilers laid out there. If you've not seen Mulan and you don't want it spoiled, well, the live action version, because you probably already know the story, then please do not keep watching. But if you don't mind spoilers or you have seen it, absolutely keep watching. Ask us questions in the chat, etc., etc. So speaking of the chat, I've done a loop around the others. So far, nothing on Twitch yet or the Facebooks, but we got a bunch of people here already on YouTube. Bobby, welcome back. Angela Foster, hello. Lily Hart, hello. Jessica Spar Talkington, hello. And whatever is bullcrap, let us know. Could be us. I mean,
I hope not.
well, wouldn't be the first time that term or the much more crude version has been applied to me. Um, but obviously not to Byron because he don't play that game.
Mm-mm.
All right, so like we usually do in these shows, what we'll start is talking about the history of the source of this movie, and then we'll go into what we liked and what we didn't like. We'll talk about themes. We'll talk about tone.
The elephant in the room.
The elephants in the room.
Yeah.
True. And that's the way these shows generally work out. So we'll start with what is Mulan and where does it come from? And for those people who are not, Angela, I think I did say hello to you. If I didn't, hello to you. Uh, because of the incredible depth of history of this character that we now generally call Hua Mulan, I'm not going to go into all of that. I mean, there are websites and Wikipedia entries and all of that sort of stuff that you can go look up. So I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version. First reference, as far as anybody can tell, to the character and the story is in a collection of ballads from the 6th century in China. That particular work doesn't exist. And so the first thing that anybody can actually point to and still read is another collection of ballads from a couple of hundred years later in which that author referenced the first book and said, I got this story from this author. The sort of more fully featured version that we are familiar with from both Disney versions comes mostly from the 16th century, and that's where the character got the family name Hua. One really interesting thing is and nobody is sure whether or not Mulan actually exists. This is a semi-legendary character.
Yeah.
If Mulan actually did exist, it would have been during the time in the Northern Wei dynasty, which is where it is set, that they were fighting against the Roran Khaganate, which are the baddies in this movie, which would have happened sometime around the middle or early to middle of the 5th century, so 430-ish to 460-ish. Oddly enough, that's exactly the same time that the West's favorite legendary, maybe really did exist but probably didn't, warrior would have lived if they did exist, King Arthur. So whoever's writing that crazy fan fiction, get to work on it. You could
Oh
have
God.
Mulan meet King Arthur. So I want to read that. Um, Angela says I like this movie. Uh, Thank you, Angela, because I think you and I are probably going to
In the
fall down on the
minority.
same side, and in the
You're in the
minority,
minority.
and in the well, it's not true. I mean, um, yeah, it probably is true, but not by a lot. I mean, it's not roundly hated. So, Byron, let's start with tell us what you liked about it. Tell us what worked for you. Tell us what you didn't like, what didn't work. And while we usually don't try to encourage people to go beyond just the structure of the movie, that's not possible with this movie. So feel
Mm-mm.
free to include a lot of the stuff outside the actual movie. Um, so fire away, man.
Yep. Well, I mean, I'll be completely honest. There wasn't a lot that I liked about it, but the visuals were spectacular. Like,
Here, here.
it's a pretty film. Like, it, it I would compare it to Great Wall, which is another one that I have similar feelings about, where it's just like great visuals, very vivid, very lively colors. Um,
Yeah,
the music is actually really good too. Like,
I'm going to have some Great Wall commentary later on myself. So
um, I definitely love the music. Like, it. That's the one thing I loved about the original score from the '90s was like how bombastic it was, and this one definitely is on par.
yeah.
But that's really about it.
All right. Well, then what didn't you like? Let's talk about the problems with this thing.
Woo-hoo-hoo. All right, pull up a chair.
Yeah,
Okay, so
I'll just sit back here with my coffee and
yes, so I'm going to quote my friend Pierome and say that as a whole, this movie was the PF Chang of wushu films. Like, yeah, it had it could like if it had been handled by like by people who understand Asian cinema better, it could have been a fantastic martial arts film. Uh, if they understood the lore of Mulan, but they didn't, and it really shows when you like run a fine tooth comb through it. Like, for example, the phoenix that is constantly shown in this movie. It is not it's not the proper kind of phoenix of Chinese culture. It's the Western phoenix, and they keep referencing it as a Western phoenix, talking about how it rises from the ashes, how it's a survivor. When in Chinese culture, the phoenix is a god. Well, in Asian culture, the phoenix is a god. It's one of the four. It's one of the four. It's one of the four god beasts. Like, I've watched enough anime to know that much.
not sure if I'd call that a proper reference source, but okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, I did my homework, but still. Um, there's that. The wire fu didn't impress me at all. It was kind of just like do we really need so many people running straight up a vertical wall? Like, we know it's fake. You're not fooling anybody. Uh, there's that. The dialogue just felt really homogenized. There was that. It was just it. That was the thing. It just it didn't impress me with like
Mm.
how they were talking. What was another thing that there was another point I wanted to make. It, there were a lot of inconsistencies in like the set, in like the set construction. Like, there were a couple of YouTubers that of Chinese descent that point out like the hodgepodge of the visuals in like the buildings and the community and the community within Mulan. And probably the biggest offense for me is that the insistence of making Mulan the special, which even in the original narrative, that was never the case.
Yeah.
She was not she wasn't Goku.
Okay, so let's clarify that. When you say special, you mean essentially superpowered,
Yes.
because she was special. She fooled everybody and rose in the original story, rose up to the level of a general. That's
But she
special.
wasn't the chosen one.
Right, but she wasn't the chosen one.
Yeah, which is like I hate when people try to play the Mary Sue Carter and female leads. Um, it was more the fact that like they again not knowing your source, not knowing your doing your homework turn before you turn it in.
Yeah.
Because in this case, the biggest issue was that in the original narrative, Mulan was just a soldier who wanted to be a good daughter. That's why she did it. It wasn't because, oh, I'm really good at fighting and I have more power than anyone else in my village.
Yeah, but see, that's not why she did it. That wasn't her motivation in this one either. She did it to be a good daughter, and in
But
fact
it was it was
fought desperately to not show that she had these powers until finally there was no choice. So because she had to save all of the rest of the members of her particular battalion.
yeah,
Um,
but it was still a point of focus in the story.
yeah, it was a point of focus, but that specific objection that that her motivation in this version was different than her motivation in the original stories or in the original Disney is not true. Her motivation was
Okay,
exactly
yeah.
the same.
Well, yeah, yeah, it was definitely exactly the same. But why take this extra step then?
Yeah. Um,
It felt tacked on.
so, okay. Um, I was going to jump in on that, but I think I'm going to hold off on that. Other things that you didn't like about it, or is that pretty much rounded up?
I'm going to go outside the film first. Some of the things in like the 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 filming location near the
One of the filming locations, but okay.
yes one yeah that was a big point of contention in hindsight because they filmed some scenes very close to the internment camps for Muslim citizens of China.
Yeah. Now,
And
again, just to be very clear on this, very specifically, the Uyghur autonomous region, Xinjiang, the
yes,
home of the Uyghur ethnic group, who are also happen to be Muslim, because they're more of a Turkic ethnicity than they are Han Chinese.
yeah, and there was that, and then the lead being the lead actress whose name escapes me.
Yifei Liu.
Yeah, she's been very vocal in her support of of the of the police in China in the wake of all the news about police brutality, and
Yeah,
it's
see,
not a good.
even let's. So she was vocal in her support of the Chinese government, Chinese Communist government, um, and against the protesters. And so she did not specifically come out and say that she was in favor of the police in Hong Kong at the time of the Hong Kong protests. She said she didn't think the protesters were in the right. Now that's a nitpick, and I agree with you 100%. I think that was a cowardly thing to do, and that's one of my problems as well with this movie. But
One
again,
of
I
my
want to be
problems with
very clear that we
Hollywood.
say exactly the right thing about what she said.
Well,
It
yeah, I
happened
mean
at the
that's one of
time
my
when the police brutality stuff was coming out.
yeah that's one of my bigger honestly it's one of my bigger problems with Hollywood and China in general, where it's just like they're trying so hard to just they're trying so hard to please the Chinese audiences that they like even if there are people in the offices of these various studios that have their own principles, they're not allowed to speak up because China has such deep pockets and they want to get the international. These studios want to get the international money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree 100% with that as a problem. Um, so move on to my likes and dislikes.
Yes.
Okay. Um, I'm going to start with my dislikes because I think you and I are going to argue more over the likes. Um, Dislikes going and we'll start like you did, or I'll start where you ended, which is going outside the actual work of the movie. I agree 100% that Yifei Liu's support of the Chinese Communist government and lack of support or vocal criticism of the Hong Kong protesters was a big problem for me. Made even more of a problem after I watched the movie and realized I really like this actress. I think she did an excellent job. I agree that it is super problematic that Disney, I can't say let, because I'm not sure that they could have stopped, but certainly allowed some of the filming to happen within the Xinjiang autonomous region, the home of the Uyghurs. While there are these, the Chinese call them re-education camps, and say they've officially said there's like 120,000 people in there. Most of the estimates is right around a million ethnic Uyghurs being re-educated so they're not Muslim and therefore won't basically become Al Qaeda to the Chinese government. That's a real problem. Yes, it's a beautiful, gorgeous region of China, way out in the western. It's where the Rural Kaghanate, close to where the Rural Kaghanate would have come from. So that makes sense. Except it's a really horrible, crappy thing to do. And speaking of horrible and crappy things to do, I read a few weeks ago, and this just blew my mind, that Disney brought on English vocal coaches to make sure that the native Chinese actors who had speaking roles would pronounce Mulan like I just did, which is the way everybody here thinks it's pronounced, whereas people in China, the A, so it's got a rising U, and the A is sort of like the A in at. So it's a lot more like Mulan. And they didn't want people to be confused in the United States. Now, knowing that this had happened, I was listening to the pronunciations all throughout the movie, and kudos to Jet Li, who plays the Emperor. At the end, when it was like the only time Jet Li ever says that name, it's really a lot closer to the Chinese pronunciation than it is. And even though Jet Li has obviously become, if you have watched the movie, obviously has become a much better speaker of English over the years than he was when he first started out making Western movies. Or even that awful Mummy 3. Since then, he has actually become quite an excellent speaker of English, and then to have him clearly pronounce the name more like the Chinese would, I'm like, good for you.
Did it.
Tea time with anime. I hate this Mulan. Real life only animation is good. If you're making that as a blanket statement that only animation is good, I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. But in this case, that's what we're talking about.
Yep.
I dislike the pacing of the movie. I thought it was off, not as much as I thought it was going to be. And the problems where the pacing happened is when they basically tried to make this the live action recreation of the Disney version. When they weren't trying to do that, when they were trying to make a historical fantasy version of the original story of Mulan, this movie worked way better.
You mean you didn't like how they basically had a conversation that was a girl worth fighting for?
Yes, yes, literally. All of those scenes, there was times in this movie where you can literally, oh, that line is right from the movie. Like,
Yes.
yeah, but it didn't need to be there. It's like literally they said, okay, here's a point where we could drop this line in, and people will like it.
No, they won't.
Angela Foster, no, it will not. If you make comments like that, Angela, you got to sort of spell out, because there's a time delay between when I'm talking and when you see it and then when you're typing. I'm not really sure if you're responding to us or if you're responding to somebody in the chat. Um, so I didn't like the pacing. I didn't like the fact that they sort of shoehorned this in, which screwed up the pacing. I am not averse to the set pieces and the production design of the communities. Now, having said that, I'm not by any means an expert in sort of ancient Chinese architecture and culture. But having said that, and I'm a historical accuracy monster when it comes to Western types of this sort of stuff. But I still don't much care that Excalibur was like ridiculously high fantasy, shiny chrome 16th century plate armor story of King Arthur. It was still an amazing movie. And so I generally, as opposed to some of the recent, like, Robin Hood or King Arthur, Legend of the Macklemore Coat, that thing was. So I didn't have that much of a problem with it, mainly because I don't know that that's not true. I actually almost went to look up the ethnic history of those roundhouses, those communal circular houses, to see whether or not that was part of the Northern Wei dynasty and the region that they were set in. But
I kind of just pieced it together myself because they're like, apparently Chinese audiences hated this movie.
Well, and the reason I think they did, and I don't know this, I'd have to dig this up, but the reason I think they did is that the Western shoehorning in of the previous Mulan stuff got in the way of what was, relatively speaking, and now we're going to start into what I liked about it, a pretty decent Disneyfication of the Zhang Yimou, Chinese historical fantasy, martial arts, tragic melodramas from the early 2000s. Hero, House of Flying Daggers, and Curse of the Golden Flower. And if you haven't seen any of those, if you liked any of that sort of aspect of this Mulan, the history, the Chinese culture, the political, there's not much political intrigue, but there's a little at the end with the emperor and so on, go watch those three movies, or any one of them. Every one of them is perfect. I think House of Flying Daggers is probably the closest thematically to Mulan. In fact, it's actually pretty close. But any of them would work. I fully anticipated, based on what I had known and read about this movie, to end the movie hating it completely. And the fact that it was close enough to a Zhang Yimou movie, not counting The Great Wall, which he also made, which just blows my mind, that the genius behind House of Flying Daggers could have made The Great Wall. But don't watch that movie, folks. Please don't watch that movie.
Yeah, don't.
And Matt Damon, Pedro Pascal, can you get better actors from the West being in a Chinese movie? Probably not. Could it suck any harder even with those guys? Probably not. So if I'm putting these up, I love Zhang Yimou. One of the most amazing directors in the past 20, 30 years. And I put Great Wall, one of his movies, up against this Mulan. Mulan wins hands down. Um, the most unbelievable and unrealistic thing about this movie is the fact it's not the martial arts work or the the fantasy of the witch or anything like that. It's the fact that and they portray this much more than they did in the animated version, that this woman could pull off trying to pretend to be a man, particularly when she has to literally untie her binding every night without anybody noticing, sleeping in a room open with a dozen guys. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That's more ridiculous than a phoenix leading her out of a canyon. I mean, come on. So Tea Time with Anime says Mushu is my fave, and I think that's, for me, the biggest problem with this movie is that the first 30 minutes of watching this movie, I was kind of like, wow, boy, this just really isn't the same thing. It really isn't, And then after about 30 minutes, I went, yeah, it's not the same thing, and it's not ever gonna be. But it's kind of a pretty cool historical fantasy wushu kind of movie. And from that point on, for the next 90 minutes, I was not thinking of this as a live action remake of the animated movie. I was thinking of this as Disney decided to try to make House of Flying Daggers. And thinking of it that way worked for me. Because it isn't a live action remake. If you look at Beauty and the Beast, it is a, beat for beat, note for note, almost, live action remake of the animated movie. The live action Lion King, which is 100% CG, but it looks live action, was a beat for beat, almost remake. Minor changes in songs and things like that. This isn't even close. It's like a completely different movie that has characters with the same name and basically the same overall plot structure. And once I sort of accepted that, I went, all right, this is actually pretty good. The performances, for the most part, it's still almost impossible to get really good child actors. So that first 15 minutes is just tough to sit through. But the good.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely a lot of good talent on display there.
Donnie Yen
from the actors, like Donnie Yen, definitely. Jimmy Wong, he was like it was nice. It was nice to see him in something in something major in Hollywood, and I'm hoping I'd love to see him in more stuff.
Yeah, but even from the the goofy guys in her unit, the what do you call him? The pretty boy, Hong Hui, all the way up to Donnie Yen, Gong Li as the witch Jianyang.
Yes.
God, well, I will watch anything Gong Li does, anytime ever.
Jason Scott Lee was pretty good.
Jason Scott Lee, I'm a big fan of Jason Scott Lee anyway, but he can be. Some of his villain turns are really over the top and like not scenery chewing fun deliberately over the top. They're just kind of off. This was over the top in exactly the right way.
Yeah, I didn't hate his his over the top shenanigans.
Yeah. And Jason Scott Lee was fantastic. All of the people in here, even like she didn't have a lot of time. Rosalind Chow as Mulan's mother, like absolutely 100%.
I haven't seen her since since Deep Space Nine.
Yep. Yeah, she's a great actress. A lot of these, and then let's get right to, as much as I don't like her political stances, Yifei Liu was fantastic. The scene where she first tries to confess to Donnie Yen's Commander Tong, and then realizes that, you know, she's not, that he's not going to accept it. He won't listen to that, and so she has to accept the fact that she's still got to not be true to herself. The emotions that play over her face subtly are just wonderful. You know, wonderful actress, terrible political position. Tea time with anime. So overall, I have a question. Do you think Mulan was fantastic? Me personally, I don't think it was fantastic. If you mean fantastic as in wonderful or excellent, as opposed to fantastic as in fantasy, which clearly it was. I think it was not nearly as bad as people say, and in fact, like I said, if Disney was going to make a Zhang Yimou movie, this is probably the best you could expect, and it was still fun.
But yeah, again, a lot of my problems were from under the hood.
Yes.
Yeah, like for example, most of the people working on this film weren't even of Asian descent. The screenwriter was, the director was a New Zealand lady. The screenwriters were not people of color either, so it was just like, why go to this much trouble on one end to get like a very strong Asian cast, and then not get like Asian screenwriters and not or Asian director. I mean, it didn't stop Great Wall.
Yeah, well, but then it didn't work for Great Wall either. I mean, yeah, they went and they got Zhang Yimou, and boy, did he produce like one of the very few stinkers of his brilliant career.
Yeah.
But I agree. I agree. It would have been much better if they had, in fact, had, instead of just having the face of the movie being really well represented with Chinese actors, both from China and, you know, Chinese American, Chinese Canadian, you know, and so on. If they had extended that all the way into the back end, you're right, it would have been much better. From a representational standpoint, would it have made a better movie? Again, Great Wall says no. It doesn't necessarily mean that every movie would be like that, but
I mean, we'll never know now.
Right. Tea time with anime. So if you were to compare Mulan live action to Beauty and the Beast live action, which one was better? I could not say because I have not watched the live action Beauty and the Beast.
Neither have I.
I guess I probably should have led with this. I've seen most Disney animated movies and some of the live action adaptations, but I'm not a huge Disney fan. I like a lot of them. I don't like a bunch of them, and it's just sort of, I'll watch a Disney movie and sometimes I'll go yeah, and sometimes I'll go okay, that was okay. So I don't have the same sort of emotional investment that what really was the core audience for this had, which was people who loved the animated version. And that may be something that was a mistake right out from the get-go. I don't remember the marketing campaigns for this, but I don't think Disney went out of its way to say this was not your mother's, father's, whatever, Mulan. This is a completely different thing. I think they tried to pitch it as basically, the Beauty and the Beast version of Mulan. And it's not. It's not even close to the same movie, certainly thematically. As you pointed out, the whole superhero thing. So, Mulan in this movie, we told right out of the get-go that as a child, she is deeply connected to Qi, to the life force, that flows through all of us. And therefore is, has the potential of being a super powerful warrior, but women are not allowed to do that, and if they do express that, they are called witches. And that's nothing like the character of Mulan, as Byron said, from either the historical stories or the original animated Disney version. And my guess is that was added in there to try to, one, key into the sort of Marvel superhero-esque demand for things. Two, make it a little bit more believable that this could be some sort of like wushu action fest. Which, if that's the case, is as equally problematic to me as anything else they've done. You couldn't have a female character who just turned out to be really good at war without making her a superhuman. You know, and
Makes more sense.
So, since I brought that up, let's start getting into themes. Byron, do you think this has a coherent theme, or if not, what themes do you think it presents, and what do you feel about them? Either how they were actively presented, and did they work that way, or what they're trying to tell us.
I mean, they were definitely trying to push the theme of being true to oneself and being just being who you truly are deep down. But it's a message that I feel the animated movie is so much better. Like it had, considering everything that led to the creation of this film, it felt joy. Like it felt it. I didn't feel the message as much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I get that, and I think it might be because of the whole superhero aspect to it. That it's being true to yourself when yourself is basically, I was going to say Captain America, but that's not
Maybe
even...
Shiva.
Shiva.
Maybe Shiva.
Isn't that much of a challenge realistically. I mean, you think about it. If
I was going to say true to your heart, but
yeah, if that was if things had taken the wrong turn, and Donnie Yen's character, the commander tried to execute her or so on, she could have killed the whole tent except for maybe him. So it's not like being true to yourself was a big stretch for Mulan in this movie, like it was in the first movie or in the animated movie. So I agree with you there. I get that. So same theme, executed less well.
yeah.
Tonally, I think this is a completely different tonal movie. The first one is it's 100% a Disney song fest.
Yep.
It's a Disney princess movie. This one isn't at all. This one is, like I said, it's a Disneyfied light version of House of Flying Daggers, with a happy ending. Kind of a spoiler alert for those people who are about to maybe watch House of Flying Daggers. There's a lot of not happy that happens through that movie. So yeah, it's a completely different tone, I think. And I think that might be another problem, is that people were expecting a Disney princess movie, and what they got was a Marvel superhero movie.
Which I find interesting because even from its inception, it was announced that this was not going to be that kind of film.
That it wasn't going to be what it turned out to be, or that it wasn't going to be like the animated version?
Like the animated version.
Okay. In which case, if you remember that, like I said, I don't remember the marketing terribly well for this, but if you remember that, then yeah, Disney tried to temper people's expectations, maybe. Clearly failed, because the biggest criticism I hear, other than individual criticisms, is that it wasn't the animated version. That it wasn't as close to it as, say, Beauty and the Beast was to, its animated predecessor.
I'd say it's more in part with Dumbo.
Yeah, So as an adaptation, yes, Dumbo veers drastically off from the original story, which in a lot of ways is a good thing, frankly.
Definitely not as bad as Dumbo.
Yeah, that's so. I haven't seen Dumbo, but from what I understand, I would agree. Well, I would of course agree because I actually kind of like this movie. Now, I don't think that they missed or they confused the themes in this movie. Like some of the other movies we've talked about, like Wonder Woman 1984, literally has like 4 thematic paths through that movie, and none of them work. This is pretty much a straightforward theme. And it's same as what happened in the animated version. It's be true to yourself. It does have a few other family is a theme in this, as is honor. But again, even that honor was a sort of sub theme or side theme in the animated version.
Yeah.
I So let's wrap this up. I think we've probably between the two of us we've talked ourselves. I've talked myself about it.
Oh, absolutely.
Ultimately, do you think that Disney is going to look at this and decide to go down this path with other adaptations, like upcoming Little Mermaid, or think this was a mistake and go strictly the Beauty and the Beast, Lion King path of try to be as true to the animation as possible?
I think it's going to be a case by case basis. Like if the source material is like Dumbo, where it's problematic, then they're definitely going to veer away from certain aspects of it. Like we both know that Song of the South is never going to happen.
No, and
But
shouldn't.
If it did, they would They would basically give it a similar treatment where like they try to purge as much of the problematic aspect as they could.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about that. You're right. There's still 2 paths for every movie, every adaptation that's coming up, and it is: do we need to fix/ignore something? In the case of Dumbo, or fix/ignore something, or modify it for a different audience. In the case of Mulan, or do we need to just be as slavishly devoted to the original as possible? I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. You're right. It is going to be a case by case basis. So that's it.
I mean, it's only a matter of time before we get the Snow White movie.
Yep. I don't have the document up here in front of me, but the list of live action adaptations literally is pretty much the list of every Disney movie made since their renaissance in the 90s, and many from before then. So
I think they're making a Tiana movie, actually.
I don't know about that. I know they are making a series that is still going to be an animated series and is going to be looking at
oh yeah, that's right. That's what it is.
Yeah, other aspects of Tiana's life, where thankfully she'll be Tiana and not a frog for most of this series. It's a limited series, like 6 or 8 episodes. Anyway, so that's it about Mulan. Me, I'm giving it a solid 3 out of 5, maybe 3.5. And we know that's not what Byron gave it. If you read his review,
It's honor on your house.
Exactly.
Honor on your cow.
Exactly. So, folks, thanks for joining us in the chat. And let us know what you thought of Mulan, and where Disney's going to go with its live action adaptations going forward. I'm Rodney Brown, editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber, and with me tonight was
Byron McNeil, contributing writer and content creator for Nerd Caliber.
All right. Now, next week we are going to be covering season 5 of the best science fiction. I guess that kind of falls down on exactly where I feel or about this. The best science fiction series ever made, The Expanse. And so hopefully you can join us if you've seen it, or if you haven't but you don't mind spoilers. Season 5 wraps up next Wednesday, so Thursday will be just enough time to be able to talk about it. And of course, next Tuesday we have Nerd Week Live. We've already got all sorts of really interesting stuff lined up. And it's silly of me to try to hold any of the stuff back, but if you're any kind of a fan of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, go look up the news that dropped today. Holy Toledo, that cast. And we'll be talking about that and a whole bunch of other things on Tuesday. Same thing, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, Tuesday for the Nerd Week Live, 8 o'clock Eastern Time Thursday for the next Full Fat Spoiler Chat. Folks, stay safe. Wear your mask. Wear two, if you've got them, as Dr. Fauci said. Wash them hands. 20 seconds. Social distance. Stay away from people. Poor South Carolina. South African strain of COVID has popped up in 2 people. Unrelated. No contact between the 2. So they both brought 2 different vectors in. Yeah. Be safe out there, folks. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.